I remember the first time I saw him. Maxwell Granger. He walked into the main office like he'd just been handed the world on a silver platter. Black tailored suit. Rolex gleaming. Confidence dripping from every inch of his 6-foot frame. And not a single clue about what we actually did. "Call me Max," he said, flashing a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I like things lean, fast, and efficient. We're going to do great things, starting now." There was a beat of silence. Then the kind of forced clapping you only hear in company town halls and kindergarten performances. I stayed quiet, arms crossed. I'd been with Nexora Systems for nearly 9 years. I'd outlasted 2 CEOs, 4 restructurings, and a corporate buyout. I knew how to play the game. But Max, he was about to learn. The first week was chaos. Max canceled our regular project review meetings and replaced them with vision strategy syncs. He fired 3 mid-level managers by Thursday, 2 by email. Then he started making changes to our flagship software product, despite not understanding the system architecture. That product, by the way? I built it. 6 years ago, after a failed acquisition nearly tanked us, I designed a new back-end infrastructure. Streamlined, secure, scalable. And I didn't just design it. I patented the system under my name. A protective move encouraged by the previous CEO who said, "Emma, if you ever leave, we'll be begging you to come back." It was buried in my employment contract. Just another clause most execs never bother reading. But Max hadn't read a thing. By the second week, he started calling me tech lead, instead of my actual title, Director of Systems Architecture. Small insult, but telling. He avoided eye contact in meetings, interrupted me mid-sentence, and praised junior staff for ideas I'd already presented. Classic power play, demean, discredit, dismiss. I kept my cool. I always do. But I started documenting everything. Then came Friday morning. Max strolled into my office, leaned against the doorframe like he was starring in a bad corporate drama, and said, "Emma, can we talk?" I gestured toward the chair across from me. He didn't sit. "I'm going to be blunt," he said, in the tone men use when they think honesty is a favor. "You've been here a long time, maybe too long. Things are changing and we need people who move at a different pace." I raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" "Meaning, I'm letting you go. Effective immediately. We've decided your position is redundant. You'll get a severance package, of course. HR has the paperwork." It was so rehearsed, so smug, I almost laughed. Instead, I leaned back in my chair and looked at him. Really looked at him. He had no idea. No idea what I owned. No idea what that one line in my contract meant. No idea that without me, without my explicit written consent, the company couldn't legally continue using the system running 82% of its operations. But I didn't say any of that. I just smiled. A calm, polite, deliberate smile. "Understood," I said, standing to shake his hand. He didn't take it. Just nodded and turned away like he was already done with me. As he walked out, he threw one last comment over his shoulder. "I'm not about to spend a dime on an incompetent employee who peaked 5 years ago." My smile didn't falter. "Good luck, Max." He paused at the door, probably confused by how calm I was. Then he left. I packed my things slowly, methodically. A few personal items. A plant I'd somehow kept alive for 5 years. A USB stick with nothing on it but photos from the last team offsite. As I walked through the open plan office, a few heads turned. Some people looked away, embarrassed. Others gave me small, sympathetic nods. No one said anything. That's how fear spreads in places like this. Quietly. By the time I got to my car, my hands were trembling. Not from sadness, from adrenaline. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was curious. How long until they realized what they'd done? I knew the answer. Monday. The weekend passed like a slow brewing storm. Quiet, heavy, and laced with static. I didn't tell anyone I'd been fired. Not my sister, who always said I worked too hard. Not my best friend, who would have shown up with red wine and a 5-point revenge plan. And definitely not my ex-husband, who had once called me too intense and married to your work. I needed silence, space, perspective. Friday night, I went for a long walk around the city, past the quiet cafes and closed bookstores, letting the cold night air numb the sting of betrayal. I wasn't mourning the job. I was mourning the insult, the ignorance. The idea that someone who had never written a line of code could walk in, strip away years of sweat and sacrifice, and call it redundant. By Saturday morning, I was ready to work. I pulled out the contract from my personal files. It was all there, in black and white. The patent listed under my name. The clause, reviewed and notarized. A carefully worded section that gave me full rights over the architectural system I had built. Nexora had a licensing agreement for its use, one that required my explicit participation for renewal, updates, or scaling. And that agreement? It was due for renewal. Monday. I let out a small laugh. Not because it was funny, but because the timing was poetic. By 3 p.m., I'd sent an email to Nexora's legal department, not from my old company account, which had already been deactivated, but from my personal address. The subject line was simple. Notice of intellectual property usage expiration. Immediate attention required. I kept it factual. Calm. No drama. Just a reminder that, per our licensing agreement, the company's right to use the system would expire at midnight Sunday unless renegotiated directly with me, the patent holder. Failure to comply would constitute a breach of IP law, and continued use beyond that point would trigger legal consequences. I signed it formally, professionally. Emma Langford, inventor, Nexora Backend Architecture Vice, 2.3 patent number US 9347901B. I CC'd their legal counsel, our old CTO, and, yes, Max. Then I closed my laptop and went for a run. 4 miles through foggy side streets, dodging tourists and street vendors, feeling the tension bleed from my body. By Sunday afternoon, my phone had started to light up. 2 missed calls from a number I didn't recognize. 1 voicemail from HR. Emma, we're hoping to clarify something regarding your separation agreement. Another from legal. Please contact us at your earliest convenience to discuss terms of your prior agreement with the company. And finally, late that night, an email from Max himself. Subject: urgent. Contract. Misunderstanding. Emma, I believe there's been a miscommunication. I'd like to speak with you directly to clear the air and resolve this situation before business resumes Monday. Please call me ASAP. Max. There it was. The panic. I didn't respond. Let them stew. Let them come to work Monday morning and realize the entire company's infrastructure, the scheduling system, the CRM, the API integrations, the automated reporting, the client access portals, depended on a license they no longer had. I didn't want revenge. I wanted respect. And if it had to come in the form of panic emails and legal fire drills, so be it. By the time Monday arrived, I had already been up for hours. Coffee brewed, phone fully charged, laptop open. I sat on my couch in leggings and an oversized hoodie, watching the clock tick toward 8 a.m., the official start of the Nexora workday. At 8:07, my inbox exploded. System error. Backend authentication failed. Urgent. Clients cannot access dashboard. Emma, please call me, now. From Max. Then came a text. From Nicole, an old friend in product. Nicole, did you do this? Please tell me you did this. Max is losing it. Whole system's down. Meetings canceled. Clients calling nonstop. The board's been looped in. I smiled. Not out of malice. Out of clarity. This wasn't sabotage. This was what happened when people in power assumed competence without proof and dismissed value without understanding it. At 8:31, my phone rang. This time I answered. Emma? Max's voice cracked through the speaker, forced calm layered over full-blown panic. We need to talk. I had no idea about the patent situation. Let's get you back in the office and... I cut him off gently. I'm happy to talk, Max. But not about a job. We're discussing licensing now, as an external partner. Silence. Emma? He said again, voice lower. Let's not make this personal. Oh, I replied. It's not personal. It's contractual. Then I hung up. And just like that, the real negotiation began. I walked into the Nexera building at 9:12 a.m. on Monday morning. Not through the back employee entrance, but through the front lobby. My heels echoed across the marble floor, crisp and deliberate, the sound unfamiliar to me after years of slipping in unnoticed with a travel mug and laptop bag. This wasn't a return. It was a reintroduction. The receptionist blinked when she saw me. Ms. Langford? I smiled. I have a meeting with legal. She nodded quickly, clearly unsure of what was happening, and picked up the phone. Her hand trembled just slightly as she dialed. I could feel the energy in the room shift. The way people paused mid-conversation, the glances from employees pretending not to look. Take the elevator to the 7th floor, she said. They're waiting. As I stepped in and the doors closed, I caught my reflection in the mirrored panel. Confident. Unshaken. But beneath the surface, my heart was thudding. Not with fear, with focus. I'd spent the weekend preparing for this moment, not just to defend my work, but to define my value. When I entered the legal conference room, the tone was cautious. The company's general counsel stood up to greet me, followed by 2 members of the internal legal team and a senior advisor I recognized from an old merger. Max was not there. I took a seat at the far end of the table. Let them come to me. Emma, the general counsel began, his voice smooth but clipped. We appreciate you coming in. We want to get ahead of this and resolve things amicably. Of course, I replied. I'm all for clean resolutions. I assume you've reviewed the licensing agreement? He nodded. We have. Your claims are valid. The system patent is registered under your name, and per the agreement, continued use without your consent constitutes a violation. And the renewal date? Expired at midnight, as stated. There was a pause. Then he leaned forward. We'd like to propose a retroactive licensing extension. 1 year. Same terms, full operational access. I smiled. That won't work for me. A murmur passed around the room. The advisor scribbled something in a notebook. I'm not here to return to the same terms, I continued calmly. I'm here to renegotiate, fairly. You're currently experiencing downtime, correct? They hesitated. I've been told it's affecting all client-facing platforms, internal reporting, and developer access. The general counsel finally nodded. Yes. So let's talk numbers, I said. I want $1.2 million for the next 12 months. Non-exclusive, renewable quarterly. Full system support through me directly or a consulting team I approve. And a public acknowledgement of the patent in company documentation. It wasn't a bluff. It was a market-aligned figure based on the system's reach and impact. The silence in the room told me they hadn't expected me to walk in prepared. Not like this. One of the legal associates cleared her throat. That's a significant increase. It's reflective of value, something this company has forgotten how to measure. The general counsel leaned back in his chair. We'll need to take this to the board. I'll wait, I said simply. But just so you know, each hour of delay affects client trust, your reputation, your stock trajectory. I'd advise moving quickly. They didn't argue. At 10:03 a.m., as I waited outside the conference room with a bottle of water and my phone on silent, I spotted Max pacing the hallway just beyond the glass. He hadn't seen me yet. When he finally did, his expression froze. Then it shifted, first to confusion, then to something else. Recognition. He walked toward me, his steps slower than usual, controlled. Emma, he said, his voice forced into civility. I didn't expect you'd come in person. No, Max, I replied evenly. You didn't expect a lot of things. I think this has gone too far, he started, hands in pockets, trying for casual. We should have had a conversation before lawyers got involved. You mean before you fired me? I raised an eyebrow. That decision was based on incomplete information. No, I said, standing. That decision was based on ego. And now you're dealing with the consequences. He opened his mouth again, but I didn't give him the chance. I'm not angry, Max. I'm simply done being underestimated. I've documented everything. The patent, the licensing terms, your email firing me without cause. I'm not here to argue. I'm here to negotiate. If you want to salvage this deal, and maybe your job, you'll let legal do their work. His jaw tensed. I walked past him, back toward the meeting room. Oh, and Max? I said, turning over my shoulder. Good luck. That word again. Luck. Something I never needed. By noon, the conference room was full again. Only this time, the energy was different. Tighter. Sharper. The board hadn't joined, but I could feel their presence looming behind every word the legal team spoke. The stakes had changed. What was once a miscommunication was now a legal crisis with operational fallout and stockholder implications. I didn't flinch. The general counsel sat directly across from me. He looked less polished than earlier. Tie loosened, jaw clenched. We've reviewed your proposal, he began, measured. And while we find the terms aggressive, accurate, I corrected. He paused, nodded. Accurate. We're prepared to accept the licensing rate with a caveat. 6-month contract. Renewable quarterly, as you suggested. Public acknowledgement. We'd prefer to phrase it as technical collaboration rather than a full patent credit. I leaned forward. No. His brows lifted. Excuse me? I want it stated clearly and publicly. System designed and patented by Emma Langford. No spin, no sanitized language. The company ran on my architecture for 6 years, and you've all benefited from it. I'm not walking away nameless so Max can save face. The room stilled. The associate to the left glanced at her notes but didn't speak. The advisor scribbled something again. The general counsel adjusted his glasses. We'll take that to the board. Do that. I stood, gathering my folder. And while you're at it, I'd advise transparency. The SEC doesn't take kindly to unreported licensing conflicts that impact system functionality. That landed like a hammer, because that's the game no one likes to admit in public. How a single systems failure, especially due to intellectual property misuse, can shake investor confidence, trigger audits, or worse, lead to delisting threats. I knew their playbook better than they thought. And now, I had my own. As I walked out into the corridor, I spotted Nicole again, this time in a corner near the elevators. She gave me a look, half shock, half admiration. They're calling you the firewall upstairs, she said with a grin. I smiled faintly. Better than being called redundant. She laughed, then lowered her voice. People are talking, Emma. Max is in full spin mode. Telling the board it was all a misunderstanding, claiming you never disclosed the licensing expiration. That's a lie, I said calmly. But let him talk. Truth doesn't need volume. Nicole leaned closer. Everyone saw the memo. You CC'd legal before the deadline. There's paper everywhere. The interns are whispering about it like it's Watergate. I didn't reply right away. My mind was already moving ahead, to the second wave. Because reclaiming control wasn't enough. I wanted accountability. The next morning, I sent a follow-up email. Not to legal, not to Max, but directly to the board chair, using the address I'd quietly kept from an old initiative we'd collaborated on years ago. The subject line was short. System licensing, public statement, and leadership conduct. I was respectful, concise, factual. I outlined the scope of the patent and its operational necessity, the termination and licensing conflict timeline, Max's decision to fire a key systems architect without reviewing internal IP obligations, the false narrative he was now pushing. I closed with a simple question. If this is how he handles internal resources, how do you expect him to manage external partners, vendors, or regulators? By that afternoon, the response came, not from the chair, but from a senior board liaison. Emma, thank you for your clarity and professionalism. Please know that we take this seriously. We'll be reviewing the matter internally with all documentation you've provided. In the meantime, we support the licensing arrangement and expect it to be finalized within 48 hours under the terms you've proposed. We regret that the company's leadership did not recognize your contribution sooner. I stared at the message for a moment, then leaned back in my chair. It wasn't a public apology, but it was a shift. Not just in the narrative, but in the power dynamic. Later that night, I got a message from Nicole again. Nicole, Max is freaking out. The board's meeting early tomorrow. His assistant said he's been calling in favors, trying to control the story. I typed back slowly. Me. Let him try. I've got the truth. And a paper trail longer than his resume. The next day would be more than a license deal. It would be a reckoning. The board met at 9 a.m. sharp on Wednesday morning. By 9:23, I was looped in. Not by Max, not by legal, but by the board chair himself. The email was brief, but the tone was clear. Please join us for a closed session at 11 o'clock. Your insight will be valuable to the ongoing discussion. That word again, valuable. 2 weeks ago, I was incompetent. Now I was valuable. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so revealing. At 10:55 a.m., I entered the executive boardroom on the top floor of the Nexora building, a room I'd only stepped into once before, years ago, when presenting a system upgrade roadmap with the previous CEO. Back then, I stood in the corner, unnoticed. Today, I walked straight to the chair reserved for me. No hesitation. Max was already seated on the opposite side, arms crossed, phone face down on the table like a prop he wasn't allowed to touch. His tie was perfect, his smile rehearsed. But the worry in his eyes? That wasn't staged. The board chair opened the session with formalities, then turned to me. Emma, thank you for joining. We've reviewed the licensing terms and your documentation. We'd like to hear your perspective, briefly, before we deliberate. I nodded. Of course. I stood, unfolded my notes, but didn't read from them. Instead, I looked each board member in the eye and said, leadership is not about control. It's about clarity, about knowing the systems that power your company, technical or human. When a new executive enters a system they don't understand, they have two choices: listen or bulldoze. Max chose the latter. Max shifted in his seat but didn't interrupt. He called me incompetent, fired me without a review, then ignored the legal implications of the infrastructure he relied on to keep the company running. What's worse, he only started listening after a failure, after the servers went dark and clients started calling. I let that sit. Everything I did, every system I built was designed to protect this company. But no system can protect you from arrogance. And if your CEO doesn't understand the architecture of your operations or the value of the people behind them, you're not just at risk legally. You're at risk fundamentally. Silence. Then one board member leaned forward. What would you do if you were in his seat? I smiled, just slightly. I wouldn't be in his seat. I'd be beside someone who understands product, culture, and legal. I'd build a leadership model that values collaboration over control. And I wouldn't wait for a lawsuit to start respecting the people who keep this place standing. There was a pause. Then the chair cleared his throat. Thank you, Emma. You can wait outside while we deliberate. I stood, nodded to each of them, and left the room. 10 minutes later, I heard raised voices through the wall. Not mine, Max's. He was unraveling, deflecting, blaming legal, the CTO, even HR. That was his last play. Shift the blame until it evaporates. But this time, it didn't work. At 11:47 a.m., the board chair stepped out. Emma, we've concluded our session. We'd like to speak with you again. Privately. I followed him back inside. This time, Max was gone. The chair sat down and folded his hands on the table. Effective immediately, he said. Maxwell Granger has been placed on administrative leave pending formal review. We'll be issuing a revised statement to staff, clarifying the situation and publicly recognizing your contribution to Nexora's infrastructure and recovery. He handed me a printed draft of the official message. I read the first line aloud. We acknowledge Emma Langford's leadership, innovation, and intellectual property as vital to Nexora's success. It hit me harder than I expected. Not because I needed the recognition, but because I knew how many women in tech never got it. How would you like to proceed? The chair asked. I've already agreed to the licensing, I said, but I'd also like to offer consulting. Short term. No full-time return. I want autonomy, and I want to help you build protections so this never happens to anyone else. He nodded. Consider it done. I stood, and as I turned to leave, he added, Emma? Yes? You didn't just protect the system. You saved the company. I gave a soft nod. I know. As I walked out of the room, the weight that had clung to me for days began to lift. Not all at once, but in pieces. Like armor I didn't need anymore. In the hallway, Nicole was waiting. He's gone? She whispered. I smiled. He's suspended, for now. And you? I looked down the corridor toward the glass walls of the floor I used to work on. I'm just getting started. The internal announcement went live at 2:03 p.m. on Friday. Effective immediately, Maxwell Granger has been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation into recent management decisions, including termination procedures and contractual oversight. Nexora Systems also formally acknowledges Emma Langford as the architect of our core infrastructure. Her patent and licensing terms are now part of our official operating agreement. We are grateful for her continued partnership and leadership through this transition. The message was simple. But inside the company, it hit like a thunderclap. By the time I left the building that day, the silence in the hallways had turned into cautious smiles, quick nods, murmured, congrats from people who hadn't made eye contact with me in weeks. It wasn't vindication I was after. It was acknowledgement. And more than that, it was change. The following Monday, I met with legal again. This time, not as a crisis point, but to propose a new framework. A system that would safeguard internal innovations and protect employees from leadership malpractice. It included automatic IP contract reviews during leadership transitions, anonymous whistleblower reporting tied directly to board oversight, a mentorship program for junior engineers focused on ownership, credit, and boundary setting. I didn't want to just leave with a win. I wanted to leave something behind. Within a week, the consulting agreement was finalized. I would stay on for 90 days, helping stabilize the system post-panic and prepare the next lead architect to take over. My terms, my pace. People still asked me if I was coming back full-time. The answer was always no, because even though I loved the work, the company had changed. And so had I. One afternoon, 2 weeks into my new role, I stood outside the building after a long meeting and noticed a group of interns walking by. One of them, a young woman with thick glasses and a nervous smile, paused when she saw me. Are you Emma Langford? She asked. I nodded. Her face lit up. I just wanted to say thank you. What you did, it's kind of legendary. We talk about it all the time in the Slack channels. You made it okay for people to speak up. I smiled, genuinely. Then keep speaking up, I said. Don't wait for permission. She nodded and jogged to catch up with her group, leaving me with a strange feeling. Not pride exactly. Something deeper. Legacy. That weekend, I finally allowed myself to exhale. I took a train out of the city, switched off my phone, and watched the world blur past the window. For the first time in months, my mind wasn't looping strategy or contingency plans. Just silence. Peace. That night, I journaled for the first time since this all began. One line stood out. I was never asking for power. I was asking for recognition. And when they couldn't give me that, I made my own table instead of begging for a seat at theirs. In the weeks that followed, news trickled out. Max's leave became permanent. The official language cited irreconcilable leadership differences. There were whispers about other complaints, other terminations swept under the rug before mine. The company's culture began to shift, slowly but visibly. Exit interviews were being restructured. Internal training now included IP awareness. And for the first time, credit attribution was baked into engineering milestones. A few execs tried to rewrite the story. Emma was always part of the team, one said on a panel. We've always valued her expertise. I didn't correct them. I didn't need to. The people who mattered knew the truth. So did the code. The architecture I built still held, and my name was finally where it belonged, on the system, in the credits, and in the story. Months later, I received a handwritten letter from the board chair. Emma, you changed how we think about leadership, not by fighting, but by standing firm. Thank you for showing us what real authority looks like. David. I kept it in the same drawer where I'd once stored my severance papers, a reminder of where I'd started and where I refused to end. Today, I lead my own consulting firm. I work with companies who want more than flashy leadership. They want sustainable systems and empowered people. I choose my clients carefully. I set my own boundaries. And I never sign anything without reading the fine print. Because in the end, this story wasn't about revenge. It was about value, visibility, and the quiet, steady strength of someone who refused to disappear when the system tried to erase her. So to anyone out there who's ever been underestimated, pushed aside, or labeled difficult for simply knowing their worth, here's my advice. You don't need to shout to make an impact. You just need to know who you are and never hand that power over to someone who doesn't. Because when they fire you thinking they've silenced you, all they've really done is light the match.